Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. I'm your host, Mari Riesberg. Over the past several years, I've combined my degrees in acting and somatic psychology to share my sustaining creativity techniques with performers. And now I've decided to share it with a bigger audience that includes you. I believe we are all creative, and this podcast is all about that. I'll be interviewing people from all backgrounds, ages, and creativity experiences to share just how creative we all are. Today, I'll be chatting with Jasmin Morad Rinna. She's a Los Angeles-based, yoga-loving, spiritual-centered lawyer. She's been the in-house employment attorney for a Fortune 50 company for the past 8 years and was a civil trial attorney both in New York City and Los Angeles for a decade before going in-house. Her creative, free spirit has taken her to over 34 states and 40 countries around the world, some of which she has lived in. Please enjoy Jasmin Morad Rinna. Welcome to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. Today I'm here with Jasmin Morad Rinna. She and I met through my friend, our mutual friend, Nick, when he and I were roommates in New York City a complete lifetime ago, before husbands, before children, living the life in New York City in the early 2000s. So welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Mari. I'm so excited to be here. I was really, really happy that you asked me to join you. I these days I don't get to talk about much except law and babies. So I'm very excited to have a conversation about something else and something that I really resonate with too. So I'm happy.
Wonderful. Yes. And I am super excited to have you here and can't wait to talk about how creativity and the law and babies roll together. And if you wouldn't mind taking just a couple minutes to share a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Sure. So I've now been practicing law, I don't know, probably now 18 years, which is crazy to think about. It's almost 2 decades. So I started out in New York City, and I was a litigator there, and I litigated cases like just business litigation. And then I moved back to California, which is where I'm really from. Although, I really started growing up in California when I was about 12, because my dad was an Air Force dentist. And so we lived all over the world and other places before that. And so I then came here and I became kind of a trial attorney here, and I did employment law, and I was doing employment and business litigation, and I tried a couple cases, jury cases. And then I ultimately ended up in-house, which is where I've been the last 8 years, working for Honda, the car company, as their in-house employment attorney here in Los Angeles. So that's kind of how my career has taken me. And I am a mom to a very precocious 2-year-old, and I've been married, and I had children later in life. So but happily so. And if you ever want to be creative, just have a baby. And that will make you a creative being, because children are just creative beings from the source. So, but yeah, so that's a little bit about me. And I'm very lucky because I have a very big, fat Persian family, and that's what I grew up with. And my parents were kind of adventurers of their own. And so that's a little bit about kind of where I came from and where I am now.
I love it. And I had no idea that you lived in other countries and kind of around the world before the age of 12. And then that's amazing.
Yeah. So my parents were very much big travelers, and very kind of hands off. It was kind of like, we have 3 kids, but we're still going to go to Monaco. We are, and my father, who we think might be the first Persian-American to ever join the U.S. Air Force, joined the U.S. Air Force as a dentist in the 70s, right after I was born in Colorado. And then it took us to Illinois, and then it took us to Turkey, and took us to Germany, Florida, DC, and then ultimately California, when my parents decided to kind of settle down a little bit. But yes, so I had grown up everywhere and I'd seen most of Europe by the time I was 10. So I've been very, very lucky that way in my life. I've always had that opportunity, but my parents were kind of, very free spirited that way. And it's interesting because we get into the topic of creativity. My parents never advocated creativity in my home and was never anything that was encouraged in me, right? Had a lawyer. But I think it had a huge influence, though, on my creative self, because I do think I'm a creative being, regardless of the job I have, which you would not perceive as being a creative job.
Right. Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, I think just being able to experience a different culture, a different language, that in and of itself can spark creativity, seeing how other people live in other countries and cultures at such a young age. That, like, what a gift and what a privilege to be able to have been raised in that capacity and now, recognize that it was a really creative experience. Maybe not in the traditional, like, performing arts creative experience, but just that living your life in a kind of creative, non-traditional fashion.
Well, it's interesting because we didn't have television during that time of my childhood. So my most vivid memories probably from that time is creating, right? It's creating imaginary games with my sisters and dance routines to Elvis albums that my dad had, or, and that is so fondly a part of my childhood that I think, I think being in an environment that was not familiar caused us to have to create, right, our own happiness and our own joy each day. And as a child, it's very easy to do that because you're very open, which is what creativity is about. As you get older, it becomes less about that. As the pieces of life start to fall, you kind of don't go back to this place of vulnerability, which really is kind of the source of it all. And I'm sure Brene Brown, but I'm a big fan. And I believe things she talks about, and that to me is what it's about. So I was very lucky in the sense that I didn't have anyone saying to me, "Hey, go into a creative career," but because I was in an environment that was unfamiliar, my siblings and I had to spend our time being imaginative about everything we did. And so I have very, very fond memories of that.
I love it. That's amazing. I love all of the, sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we have to make something with it or out of it. And that's where creativity can be sparked and flourish. And I think that's amazing. And you started to talk a little bit more about kind of what it means to you to be creative, but I wonder if you could share, like, when you think about creativity, what does it mean to you to be creative?
I mean, honestly, I think for me, it means being free. So I think that creativity means being authentic and free in a way that you may not be in other parts of your life. So when you create, I think you're creating from this authentic place, right? It's authentic emotion that's resonating, and it's authentic expression. And I think that for me, creativity has always been my freedom, right? My freedom and my escape in many ways. And so it's wonderful. I mean, it's just like what music does for me or art does for me. It allows me to just feel like I'm in the moment and I'm free from anything else that might exist in my life. So that's how I view creativity.
That's incredible. I love it. I think that's, being free and your authentic self, and noticing that when you experience music or art or something in that realm, that you are moved and have that experience in relating to it. I love it, because I have a similar experience when I hear music or, turn on a song and want to move my body in that moment of like, yes, this is exactly what I need right here, right now.
Yeah, it's centering and very present, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's very easy in life to not be present and to not be centered because we have so many other things that are pulling us and the demands of life today. And so I think it's very freeing to just be in a moment, to live in a moment of beauty. And, beauty is all relative, right? So everybody has their own perception of beauty. And I think I like to surround myself, I say, with beauty. And I don't mean that by just a traditional sense, but I just mean in the sense that, for me, even things like that I didn't know about myself, when I got older, I didn't realize I was so good at decorating my house, right? Interior design, which is a super creative area. And honestly, I thought, how come no one told me that I might be able to do this for a living? Because, when I was younger, I didn't really think about those things as being an option for a career. And that's partly because of growing up with like first generation immigrant parents who are concerned with security and all the things that you don't equate with creativity.
Yeah.
But the irony about that is that, I have a sister who is an extremely talented artist, naturally talented, has always been the person that in my head was like, that's a creative person, right?
Mm-hmm.
And she makes a living as a creative and made a living, had, art studio major, MFA, the whole thing. And I think, once my parents saw that, they were like, wow, you can actually do something with this and make it into a life. And so I never really followed that path because, really I was kind of influenced so heavily by what my parents were saying and doing. And I think, unfortunately, it really stopped a lot of parts of my creative self until I got older and really kind of tapped into that. And I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit more about how that all comes out, but that's kind of how it all came to be.
No, you're kind of leading me right into my next question around kind of challenges and blocks you have experienced with creativity and how you've navigated these blocks. And you kind of spoke a little bit, but if you would share a little bit more, that'd be great.
Yeah. So, I think that the way that I've dealt with challenge really when it comes to something like this, I am a very spiritual person. I have a very strong meditation practice. Mm-hmm. I believe in it. It's something that I feel is like I need it very much. And it's something that I think has helped me mentally, like when I mentally need to move forward on something or I feel blocked, it's a way that I go internal and tap into that authentic creative self, right? Mm-hmm. And I feel like that is the way that I've kind of worked through that. But also, when I don't mean to say this because I think authentically I started out as a creative person. I always was writing from the minute I was born, and I loved writing poetry and I wanted to be a fiction writer. The joke always is that lawyers are failed authors, really. That's all they are. They're really good writers that really thought they weren't good enough to do anything more than that. But I think going within myself to really like tap into who I am and know who I am, which took me years to get to really kind of knowing my authentic self and who I really am, has really been the way that I've maneuvered those challenges. Because I think once you're authentic and once you know who your authentic self is, you can manage anything. The world is not necessarily influencing your direction or your steps or what steps you're doing to kind of move around an obstacle. You are just at your core centered and focused and really have tapped into what it is that's going to make me authentically happy and, authentically creative or be able to take on the challenge.
Yeah. What a gift to be able to like have that internal time and awareness and then be able to do something with that information or trust that information to move through challenges and blocks. I think that, I think sometimes we can get even stuck in the internal space of like, oh, I have awareness around it. And then what do I do with it? How do I take it out into the world or out of myself? And I think that it sounds like you really found that connection to trusting what you learn and putting it into action?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a doer, so that's who I am. I'm a doer. So once I've really kind of shifted my mindset on something, everything kind of flows from there. But I think part of it is, reflection and internal reflection manifests. Once there's a shift internally, it naturally manifests in the universe. I mean, it's what people talk about when they talk about energy shifts, or the feeling that, once your energy is shifted, all of a sudden you're attracting a whole bunch of new things and then you're unblocked, right? You're unblocked. You're no longer feeling. And I think a lot of creatives go through that process without maybe consciously going through that process by really kind of changing their energy in some way through their focus, right? So that happens for a lot of people, I think, that are creating art or writing and I think that's really important, right? The ability to really be conscious of that and say to yourself, maybe at this point, I need to shift my focus and really focus my energy elsewhere. I am someone who's had quite a few obstacles in my life. I mean, just generally, I've had struggles in many ways. I dealt with infertility for 5 years before I had my child, and it was a very painful, dark time in my life. And I think coming out of that, I had to really kind of let go, and the minute I let go, I had a child. And it's one of those things where I certainly don't know the right way to do it. I just have had a lot of practice at it. I just had a lot of practice at it because of life. But that's.
Yeah, I love hearing that, that moment of letting go or surrender, and then magical things can happen. You've created space. When we hold on to something so tightly, all of our energy and our focus is holding on to it. And when we can let it go, amazing, incredible things happen. And it sounds like you have had many, or at least one experience of that happening.
Yeah, it's about trust, right?
Yeah.
And trusting is the same trusting that helps a creative come up with, create something beautiful in the world, right? It's trusting themselves to really understand what they're creating comes out of what they're trying to send out in the world. So I think it's trust. It's trust in the universe, trust in yourself, trust in the belief that all things will work out the way they're supposed to, and that sometimes while you're making your plan, life has a bigger plan for you, right? And
so true.
I wouldn't change my fertility journey. It was incredibly painful. But if I didn't have that, I would not be as grateful as a mother as I am today. I mean, today, I do not take a moment for granted of having this child. She is a miracle. I mean, her existence is a miracle, and I never forget that. I never, ever, not even one day, forget that. And I think that has made me the best parent I could have possibly been. And I don't know if I would have been that great as a parent if I had gotten her so quickly, right? If arrived in my life so quickly. So, that's, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think that, along with the trust, there's also that vulnerability that you mentioned earlier, where it is a vulnerable space to let go and surrender, but you have such a positive outlook on it that I think in and of itself is a gift to yourself to say, even though I went through all of these challenges, I wouldn't change it, because I wouldn't be the person I am today and the mom I am today if I hadn't gone through those same experiences. And the gratitude that I hear when you talk about it is beautiful and lovely. And I think it's amazing.
Well, I appreciate it. I can't really take full credit of it. My mother was just this force to be reckoned with. And I lost her in the middle of all of this to cancer, and, almost 5 years ago. And, I have to say, her attitude, her tenacity, I mean, all of these things that I see in myself now, I'm like, wow, I'm so much like her. Right. And you don't realize that till you get older, how much your parents' blueprint is within you.
Yeah.
So I can't take full credit for it. I mean, my parents made me who I am. And I think part of it is my parents have always been very earnest, open, loving people, and very, very loving in everything they did. And so there's no way when you're surrounded by that to come out of that without feeling like you, and what choice do you have? You have a choice to make, right?
Yeah.
And that's what Brene Brown says, right? You have a choice to make. And so when you make a choice to be positive and focus on positive, you are tapping into the highest level of energy in the universe. You're tapping your best self, and that is your creative self, because that is the most authentic, highest form of who you are. So
I love that. That's amazing. That positivity taps into the universe and the highest self being your creative self. I want to like embroider that on a pillow or something.
Wow. I mean, well, I think that's great. I mean, I've never had anyone say that to me, but I'm happy that you like that. I don't know. I think about this stuff a lot. So, I'm so happy to be here to share these thoughts. I just privately think about these things, but it's great.
I love it. And I mean, you seem like someone who is inspired by a lot of things, not only internal, but external. When you think of being inspired, who or what inspires you these days?
So I have to be honest. So I'm going to just say, COVID and really everything that's happened with COVID has been really hard on me. And I think I realized first, I'm an extrovert, so that has made it very difficult for me because I get my energy from people. So when I'm not around people, my creative self doesn't bloom, right? And so I would say, people inspire me generally, but, I am very inspired by my family, my friends, my husband, and just to show you, as a lawyer, for example, you'd think I wasn't creative, right? But I'm creative, and it's not unintentional in the sense that my whole life, everyone I ever loved, every man I ever loved was a creative, and that's what I was attracted to, and that's who I was always with. And I never really I always thought to myself, well, of course, because I would never date anyone who didn't love music. I didn't care if you liked only country music. I didn't care if you only liked rap music, but as long as you were passionate about music, you were,
it works. Yeah.
So I think that when I think of what inspiration is to me, I mean, music, art are all inspiration for me. But now that I have a child who's like a wellspring of creativity and who I want to foster creativity and huge source. But then, I also have my husband, who is a very creative person, and just that creativity is what binds us. We love the way that, we love art and music and culture together. And so we were the, couple before COVID that was always like at a concert or going to see some rare art exhibit and so those are the things that inspire me, because to me, they're the source of life. So I don't, now I will say that I think that's partly one of the things that's been hardest for me about COVID is, not being able to see performing arts, not being able to experience all the things that I think I took for granted very much about creativity and surrounding yourself and infusing yourself in that energy. Losing that energy has been incredibly hard. And then, feeling the energy of the world, which feels very fearful, and, you feel the weight of it on you, right? And as a creative person, when you're a creative person, and I think all people are, everyone feels it to some degree, right? And creatives feel pain more strongly because they feel other emotions more strongly. And I feel like I have felt the weight of that. So inspiration wise, I love looking out in the world at people that are creating positive, happy, wonderful things. Doing positive, wonderful things to kind of bring the world together. That's really what's inspiring me now, because, and a good example would be someone like Barack Obama. I mean, he's just a wonderful, wonderful person, right? And you see him bringing music into his books, and he just wrote a book and he talks about how much he loves his family and his daughters. And it's such an inspiration. It's so much good, you know, and I think that really, honestly, that's probably at the heart of it for me. You know, and I think, so my husband is working on his own kind of project now and his own venture to kind of do that and to create like a social interview site where people ask and answer questions to bring out the best stories in each other and reuniting people really to kind of bring that message. And so I'm very inspired by what he's doing. You know, it's a very, it's called Your Stories and My About You. And it's my about you, like my about you, you know, let's talk about each other. So you can see why we're married. we're very much simpatico that way, in terms of our core belief of inspiration.
I love it. That sounds amazing. And yeah, I too am an extrovert, and the COVID pandemic adventure has been more challenging, and I've had to do maybe some deeper dives into myself internally to find out, okay, what are the things that I can still participate in, stay connected, and still feel that positivity, that joy that I got from going to live concerts or theater or, you know, an art opening. And it has definitely been challenging, and I've been able to succeed in it and start a podcast and connect to people in this way. And so I feel for you, and I completely understand. And I love the stuff that your husband has started. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Yeah. So it's, you know, I think there's just so much energy that, you know, you kind of have to figure out what to do with your energy, right? What you're doing. And it's wonderful that you're able to put it into this form. I mean, I love podcasts. I've gotten to be really into podcasts during COVID. So, you know, these are the things that you kind of learn as you have to adjust, right? So.
Absolutely. Nice. You talked a little bit about community and family and friends, but I wonder, you know, how does your community impact or influence your creativity these days, or in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously being married to a creative, you know, it impacts my everyday. I mean, I'm with someone who's like, you know, in his heart is an artist, right? And what he's trying to do. And I think for me, you know, I am a natural writer. So, you know, I definitely feel like when I see things or I'm trying to work through things, writing is my way. And, you know, writing was something that, I mean, when you ask, and I'm sure, you know, we're going to talk about this, but writing is something that has been a platform really for me for a long time, because as a lawyer, that's what I do every day, right? I became a lawyer partly because that is partly what I get to do every day and partly what was natural to me, right? So, but when I think about community, I mean, the community impact is really kind of the bigger questions around, you know, what is going on with people and people around me to really kind of inspire me. So when I see someone doing, you know, an amazing campaign, right, dedicated to, or a dance party, like there's Ryan Heffington, he's a dancer. I think he's out of New York City. And he does these dance parties, you know, I mean, these are the kinds of things where and he's doing these quarantine dance parties where literally like you just put on music and you're like jumping up and down, and it's great.
Yeah.
Like, the kind of stuff, you know, that I think inspires me. But I'm also really into yoga as part of like my whole practice. And so yoga is something that very much grounds me. It's a way for me to kind of bring my physical self connected to my breath, connected to my mind, and bring it all together. So yeah, I mean, there's so much beauty in the world. I think it's hard to say like, what does one thing do for another? But I think, you know, giving back to the community and then kind of being receptive to what people have to offer is really what is impacting me. And yeah, I mean, you know, as a lawyer even, and we haven't really talked a lot about my career, but even in my career, the decisions I make or the advice I give as a lawyer is often creative. And it's creative because it's coming up with solutions to problems that people haven't been able to solve, right? And you do it in a way that balances a lot of competing interests and a lot of people's desires for something different. And you have to be creative in the way that you present your ideas and the way that you come up with an idea. And so a lot of that comes from what you're supported by within a community. So in terms of the ability to do that.
I love that. And hearing that even being a lawyer, there's a lot of creativity that goes into it. Maybe not the traditional form of creativity, but when we think of kind of everyday creativity, problem solving, it's a huge part of it.
But a lot of lawyers, like, trial attorneys, when you try a case in front of a jury, it's not what you see on TV. There's a lot more grunt work involved, a lot more hard nights involved. But ultimately, though, it is a creative process. So it's like giving birth to something. It is very much a development of a story and a development of a theory, right? That you're trying to tell people, please listen to my story. I mean, that's what you tell a jury when you're in front of a jury. Please listen to my story. I'd like to tell you my story and why we're here. And that is very creative. It takes a lot of practice and skill because you're doing it within the confines of, rules, right? Yeah. So you have rules about the way that you can say things and do things in a courtroom, but you are ultimately getting out a human story. And that human story, whether it resonates with the 12 people in that jury box, means the difference between winning and losing, or between, your client getting their day in court. And I think it's very important. I think a lot of people think, well, lawyers aren't creative, but believe it or not, I mean, almost all lawyers I know have some creative hobby, and the majority of them are very diverse people who have gone on to do other things. A lot of them do other things. And many of them, I'm just doing a shameless plug for lawyers, because I think they get a bad rap, but
go for it. I love it.
That a lot of lawyers, especially trial attorneys, I think they're creative people naturally, and that's why they became trial lawyers. And even people who do deals are creative because they're structuring something that no one else has structured, right? We're all building. It's just building different things and not what you think of in the traditional sense. So yes.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, to have a new kind of look at that career through a creative lens is a very new and unique experience and thing to hear, even for myself. I see the legal world on television and have many friends who are lawyers. Yes. And I don't typically think of like, yep, lawyers are the most creative people I know.
No. But I'm a left-handed lawyer, right?
Yeah.
So make the joke like I'm kind of both. I'm right-brained and left-brained, and and I think there are a lot of lawyers that are. In fact, most presidents have been, believe it or not, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, George Bush. And so when you see people, and they were all lawyers. So, and when you see that they, being a lawyer is not mutually exclusive from not being creative. And actually the lawyers that are the most creative are the ones that are most successful, because they're the ones who come up with the ideas that are outside the box. And they're ideas people, right? They're ideas people that put stuff in writing and in action. And so the lawyers that actually do the best in their career and are the most successful are the creative ones. They're the ones that make creative arguments. They're the ones who think of the creative logic, right? So it seems contradictory to have both together, but they both can coexist together. And I think they do it very well. And I think if you're not a creative lawyer, I think you probably aren't doing as well as someone who is. And I think all lawyers, just like all people, can be creative. It's just tapping into what that is for you and how that manifests. So
absolutely. I love it. Thank you for the plug for a new version and a new view of the legal field, the lawyers in particular.
Yeah.
That's great. And you have talked so much about writing, and you shared a little bit about you've been writing since you were born. What is your earliest memory of being creative?
So I have two very distinct memories. When I was probably, I must have been maybe 8 at the time, I actually entered an art contest doing a clay figure. And I put together this clay farmer and I painted him and I put him together and it won a prize. And I was just like shocked that I won because, I grew up in a home where my mother and my sister were like the artists in the house. I mean, my mother had a natural talent. But she didn't want to have a creative life. And it was kind of forced on her, even though she was naturally talented. And so it was definitely, she didn't realize until she was later in life that she was super creative in her living, right? Which is what I've kind of picked up and that's what I've become. And my sister, who's like a studio art major, extremely talented. So I remember getting that prize and thinking, wow, like, I can't believe that this happened. And this was in a form that wasn't writing. And, at the time I was always writing poetry. And I remember sending a poem in when I was probably about 9 or 10 years old to a contest. I saw a contest on the back of, a book. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try to put something in. And I sent one poem in. And I got a very polite letter back from the editor who said, your poem is really wonderful and it's very great, but most poets are prolific and do more than one poem, not realizing probably that they didn't realize I was 9 years old at the time. But, those are my earliest memories really of like creating. And it's funny because throughout my life, there were always intervals where creativity would show up. Like I spontaneously decided to, try out for a theater role. And when I was in college, on a whim that someone had said to me, like, there's this role, do you want to try it? And, I had in my head, all my parents saying, you need to stick with law. You need to stick with like all the right things that you're supposed to be doing. And in my head, but then I was like, I'll just go do it. I mean, what are the chances I'm going to get anything? And I actually ended up being selected to be the backup, right? For the
understudy.
And, I remember my mom talking me so out of it. And, think about that now. And I think that would never happen today. But like then, creativity was just not in the sphere of what I could consider. Like, even though I loved it so much, it was just not something I could consider. And I think it was partly like being young and not being influenced by someone who was saying to me, go for it. You can do this. And so I'm very conscious of that with my child. I mean, I think, it's really important to cultivate that because my arrival to creativity and having it be a very conscious part of my life didn't come into my life until I was much older. And I think it's just partly, I was influenced by the fear, right? Fear is a lot of things down underground, and the fear and the shame that like, I won't be good enough, or that this isn't something that I can do, and that this is not who I am. And in reality, it was none of those things. And I think once you tap into like the vulnerability and the authenticity of who you really are, then it kind of all that stuff dissolves, right? So, So I have some really early memories, but honestly, like probably most lawyers, I didn't have anyone saying to me, hey, you should go be, you should go start a band, or you should, none of that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting to hear about, just how powerful the people who support us are. Like,
it's
in
so
whatever
true.
direction.
It's so true. And I think, I think that when I started to really know who I was the only time that I could really kind of parse that out and really understand, like, I could have gone down another path. I feel like now at this age that I'm at, when you're in middle age, which is what I am, you have a very different perspective because you think about all the things that could have happened. And you don't have regrets, but I think you think about, what path could I have taken? Now, I'm a big believer you can change your path anytime you want. And if I wanted to quit my job tomorrow and start a flower shop or do something else, I could probably do that. I just think that, it's having people around you that support creativity is a very critical part to just following a creative path if you choose to make that your life. And I think that if you don't, it's okay too, because you will find your way ultimately back to creativity, because we are all creative beings. And so I'm a really big believer in that. And I think once you know who you are and you tap into your vulnerability, your authenticity, and you've let go of shame and let go of kind of the things that hold you back from creativity is there and change happens there. And so, yeah, I mean, you can tell I love Brene Brown.
I love it. I love it. I couldn't have said it better myself. I think it's amazing to have, the support, the vulnerability, the authenticity, showing up in the moment and following the creative impulse, following the creative spark. And it's a choice. You don't always have to. It's completely fine to choose not to, and not to today, and to choose to do it a year, a month, a week, a day from now. That's completely fine too.
And you know what? And this kind of like goes back to your question. This is a really interesting point. So one of the reasons I've traveled so much is because I think creativity is about openness. And I think when you travel a lot, you're very open because you're opening yourself to what might be scary to some people, right? And that's very important. And that actually has a huge impact. I mean, to go back to the question of huge impact, right? And I think for me, and for a lot of people who can't be creative, traveling is a huge way to be that, right? It's a huge way to be that. And I think some of your guests have even, expressed that. I mean, is a way to open up your mind and have this kind of mind opening experience, right? In a world that doesn't look like yours. And how you take that in and how you perceive that and how you handle that says a lot about where you are in your creative journey, because I think we're all on a path, right? And how to handle and manage that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, traveling shouldn't be ever underestimated, because I think it's important to know, how is everyone else in the world living? I mean, we don't all live the same way, right? And creative people, when they need inspiration, a lot of them do go off, right? And go somewhere to find that inspiration. And sometimes you do need to be in an environment and a surrounding that allows you to cultivate that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Traveling. I miss it. I love it. I can't wait to do it again.
I very much miss it. I mean, I was looking at pictures of planes thinking, oh, I can't wait till I can get on you again. But
I agree. Absolutely. Well, since we are in the world of pandemic and COVID, when you think about kind of the everyday issues that you face, how have you used creativity to solve your current issues?
I mean, I think I've had to learn to live differently during COVID, because COVID is not compatible with a extrovert's creative life. So to have a creative life, the way that I created my own life, is one in which I was free and I was bouncing around everywhere, and I kind of come and go as I pleased. And I would be listening to music, going to a concert one night, doing this and doing that. So I've had to really, focus more on the internal and really kind of adjust and be creative about, what does my day look like? I mean, it's taken me a long time to kind of get in a routine that I was happy with during COVID, right? Because I'm working from home, it's very different experience, and I'm not used to it. And honestly, to be honest, I don't think full-time work from home is for me. I mean, I think as an extrovert, I like to be around people, but I'm home for, safety reasons and for reasons that I just feel like more comfortable just because of my family. But I think having to be creative about what does my day look like? It's avoiding the Groundhog's Day and the repetitiveness that comes from a lack of creativity has been what I've had to do. And I think that's creative because, you have to kind of come up with what's going to break my Groundhog's Day today.
Yeah.
Children, because you already have Groundhog's Day with children. And so you couple that with a pandemic where you can't take them a lot of other places except for maybe parks and beaches. And we're so fortunate because we live near the beach and we're in California and there's a lot of physical beauty that's outdoors. And we're lucky because we can sit outdoors for a long period. There's many parts of the country that aren't able to do that. So I feel like it's, having to be creative during the time of COVID is really having to think about what does your life look like now? And it really kind of turned my life upside down for a long time. And I was kind of really unsettled by it. And I'm still, I still have to say everything in the world still affects me quite a bit. The election did, and all of these things that are going on in flux really affected me. And really affected me emotionally because I felt like how do we manage that flux with everything that's going on at home, which feels like it's just stifled my creativity. And I think I've just had to learn to be differently creative, right? So, I like to sit down and draw pictures with my daughter, or I do something. And like I said, children are a wellspring. So if you ever want to be creative, just have a child because they will force you to be, because they don't know anything different. They don't watch TV. They don't, they want to play and be in their head, and they're trying to figure out everything in their minds, and they're trying to figure out the world. And it's a very creative process. It's trial and error. It's, it's a lot.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. Yes. Being around children, even if they're not yours, nephews, nieces, if you can, if you live together, there's that opportunity, or, FaceTime them or get on a Zoom call with your kids.
Yes. They're so funny. I it's hard because I know a lot of kids have been very impacted by this pandemic, the ones that are old enough to really recognize what they're missing, right? For my daughter, she's going to be 2 next month, and she doesn't know any different, right? I mean, she wasn't in a daycare, so she didn't know that, and she didn't know. She has the same people in her life, but she's seeing far less of them than she did before. And, she's lucky because she sees my father, who she adores and, is her favorite person. But, the only thing that makes me sad is watching her desire to be with other children, being able to be with other children at this point in time. And, but she always finds joy in the most ordinary things, which is what kids do at her age. And I think that is the most creative thing you can do, because that's what I'm trying to do, is find joy in everyday things during a pandemic. So
absolutely.
So we can learn a lot from them and their reaction and their kind of approach to life. Because they are approaching it as just creative beings, because I think that's the way we're born. We're born creative. And whether you go down that path or not, again, goes back to the influence and a lot of your own desire to only be in that space all the time,
Absolutely. I love it. Well, it has been such a treat to chat with you. And I have one final question. What is your secret to creativity?
I think, that's a hard question. I think my secret is really listening to myself. I think that in my younger years, I was really bad at listening to myself. I always knew inside, and I just didn't listen. And I think listening to yourself, hearing yourself, and really going with what you are and what you know, right? As opposed to what other people are telling you and everything that's going on outside of you, to that true, authentic, creative self and voice is just absolutely the secret to continuing to have a creative life. I think you cannot do it without that. You you have to really know that you're hearing yourself, right? And creative people are people that are tapped into themselves much deeper than a lot of other people. And that's not to say other people wouldn't have been able to do that, because I don't want it to seem like they couldn't. But creative people, in my view, and just in my experience, because I've had so many in my life, they're tapped into that voice very deeply, and they can't ignore that voice, which is why they continue to create. And I think that's the secret.
I love it. It's a beautiful secret, and maybe not so secret, but listening to yourself is, I trust it. I support it. More people should do it. But thank you. Thank you so much for sharing all of the stories and the pieces, and getting to talk about creativity with you has been such a treat. So thank you for joining me today.
Yes, Mari, thank you so much for having me. I have to say, this has been so enjoyable for me too, because this feels like it was a creative venture for me. Great.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the only thing I would say is, I think anyone in your audience who's very interested in what my husband is doing is going to be launching this new social interview site. It's a site that's committed to positively getting people to ask and answer questions to bring out the best stories in people, so we can come together again and really reunite people around their most important stories. It's called yourstories.com, or My About You, because it's always about the other person too. So I really encourage that. I'm very proud of him. And I think it's going to be a really exciting new site that's going to be a little less divisive than some of the things we're seeing. And I really look forward to listening to all your other guests. I really have enjoyed the podcast. So I'm very happy for this and for the podcast and how well it's done. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to the Sustaining Creativity Podcast. We'd love to keep in touch, so like us on Facebook and Instagram. We are Sustaining Creativity. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Tag your friends and your family so they can listen too. We love to hear from you, so leave your comments, reviews, and questions. Tune in Tuesdays for a new episode. And remember, with creativity, anything's possible.